Today, we're going to dig into a really powerful story, how a massive, thriving civilization can literally just disappear from the map. And this isn't just a history lesson about Muslim Spain. It's a look at one very specific interpretation of its fall. A kind of cautionary tale, really, about what happens when a society, according to the source we're looking at, loses sight of what it's all about.
I mean, think about it. How does a great civilization just vanish? How does a place that was this incredible beacon of learning and culture, a place that must have felt so permanent to the people living there, just fade away? That's the big question we're tackling today, and we're going to do it through the story of Al-Andalus, or what we call Muslim Spain.
Okay, so to really get a sense of the scale of what was lost, just think about this one number, 600. At its absolute height, the city of Cordoba had 600 mosques. Now, someone whose account we're drawing from recently visited, and you know what they found? One. A single mosque, and it was closed. I mean, that contrast, right? From 600 to one closed door. That tells you pretty much everything you need to know.
All right, so before the fall, there was this incredible, magnificent rise. And the whole foundation of Muslim Spain, well, it was built to mirror Medina, the very first Islamic city-state. The idea here, the perspective we're exploring, is that as long as they stuck to that spiritual blueprint, the civilization didn't just survive, it thrived.
And oh, did it thrive. I mean, it absolutely flourished. The source material we're looking at paints this picture of a society that wasn't just doing well, it was setting the standard. We're talking bigger mosques, more brilliant scholars, bigger and better centers of learning than pretty much anywhere else. It was, by this account, a true golden age.
And here, you're looking at some of the intellectual firepower behind that golden age. These weren't just random names on a list. These guys were absolute giants of philosophy, of law, of science. You've got Ibn Hazm, a true polymath, Ibn Rushd, who the West came to know as Averroes, and Ibn Abd al-Barr. I mean, these are the people who formed the very backbone of Islamic learning at the time.
So what happened? What went wrong? Well, according to the narrative in our source, the turning point wasn't some huge foreign invasion. It wasn't a big economic collapse. Nope, it was something internal. A shift in focus, away from faith and towards, well, stuff. Materialism.
And this slide really gets to the core of that conflict. You've got two paths. On one side, you have the Medina model, a society focused on faith, on the hereafter, on unity. And on the other side, the pull of the dunya. That's an Arabic word for this temporary material world. The argument being made is that this chase for dunya, for wealth and power and self-interest, it started to poison the society from the inside out. It's like they took a wrong turn.
And this quote from our source really drills down into the theological argument. The Muslims were not created for the dunya. They were created for the hereafter. From this point of view, the whole reason for this civilization's existence was spiritual. So the moment that purpose was traded in for worldly ambition, the entire foundation just started to crack.
Okay, so how does a shift like that actually play out in the real world? Well, it had devastating consequences. When a society becomes all about me, it just starts to eat itself from the inside out. And that leads to the deepest wound of all, betrayal.
And this is a really shocking claim. The very leaders, the rulers who were supposed to be protecting the people, were, according to our source, making deals with their enemies, with Christian forces, to go fight their own fellow Muslims. All for what? For personal gain, for a little more power.
To really drive this point home, the source brings up this powerful historical figure, this archetype, Abu Righal. Now, this is a guy who's infamous in Islamic history for one thing. For a bag of money, he guided an enemy army straight to the Kaaba in Mecca, Islam's holiest site, with the goal of destroying it. His name basically became another word for traitor.
And boom, the source slaps that label right on them. The rulers of Spain, who put their own power and wealth ahead of their people, ahead of unity, they were, from this perspective, the Abu Righals of their time. They were selling out their entire community for worldly gain.
So after years and years of this internal rot, this decay, city after city started to fall. And that brings us to the final act of this tragedy, the collapse of the very last Muslim stronghold in Spain, the Kingdom of Granada.
So how did it finally end? Well, the last act really hinges on a broken promise. The last Muslim ruler, Abu Muhammad, he signs a treaty. He agrees to hand over control peacefully. And the one condition was simple: protect my people. Let them keep their faith, let them keep their positions. But the moment, literally the moment control was handed over, that treaty was broken.
And the last heartbreaking scenes of the story all unfold right here inside the absolutely magnificent Alhambra Palace.
The source describes it as a place where your eyes just can't even process all the beauty, the architecture, the artistry. It's just this breathtaking, final monument to everything that civilization had built.
But here's the gut-wrenching irony. Carved into the stunning walls of that palace, over and over and over again, is this motto: dominance is only for the sake of Allah. It's this declaration that all power, all glory, it all belongs to God. And yet, as the source points out, while those words were still on the walls, the belief behind them had been ripped out of the people's hearts.
And that brings us to the end of the story, to this one powerful, deeply personal moment that's really presented as the moral of this entire epic.
So imagine this. From a high point in the palace, the conquering forces raise a crucifix, the ultimate symbol that everything has changed. And the last king, Abu Muhammad, he's watching this happen. And he just breaks down. He starts weeping for everything that has just been lost.
But here's the thing. The story doesn't end with sympathy for him. Not at all. It ends with this absolutely crushing rebuke, which is said to have come from his own mother. She looks at him and asks, "Why are you crying like a woman when you couldn't defend it like a man?" In the context of this whole narrative, that's like the final brutal judgment. It frames the fall not just as a military loss, but as a total failure of character, a failure of spirit.
And so, that's where we're left, with this powerful lesson at the very heart of this specific account. It's a story that frames the fall of a great civilization not as something that happened to them, but as a consequence of their own spiritual decay and internal division. It's a perspective that really forces us to ask ourselves, what are the core principles that actually hold a society together? And what's the real cost when we forget them?